The Shadows Beneath. Chapter 1. The Invitation. It began with an envelope, plain and unassuming, delivered to Julia's mailbox on an otherwise uneventful Friday afternoon. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the ink slightly smudged. She flipped it over, searching for a return address. But there was none. Intrigued, she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper. Written in elegant script were the words, "You are cordially invited to the unveiling of Harper Manor's forgotten secrets. Saturday, 8 p.m. Bring no one." Julia's heart raced. Harper Manor had been abandoned for decades, its history shrouded in rumors of tragedy and the supernatural. She couldn't recall anyone mentioning a restoration or reopening. And yet, the invitation was real, the paper tangible in her hands. She debated telling her best friend Liam, but the instructions were clear. Curiosity gnawed at her. By the next evening, she found herself driving up the winding, overgrown road leading to the manor. Chapter 2. The Manor. Harper Manor loomed in the distance, a skeletal shadow against the twilight sky. The windows were dark, and ivy crawled up its stone walls like veins. Julia parked her car near the rusted gate, which creaked open with a push. The air was unnaturally still as she approached the massive oak doors. They opened before she could knock, revealing a grand foyer dimly lit by flickering chandeliers. The faint scent of decay lingered. A figure stepped into view, a tall man dressed in a tailored black suit. His face was gaunt, his eyes deep-set and cold. "Miss Julia Hayes," he said, in a voice that sent chills down her spine. "We've been expecting you." "Who are you?" she asked, clutching her purse tightly. "I'm the steward of Harper Manor," he replied with a slight bow. "Please follow me." Julia hesitated but followed him down a corridor lined with the faded portraits. The faces seemed to watch her as she passed. Finally, they entered a grand ballroom. A long table stood at its center, set for a feast. Several other guests were already seated, their faces pale and expressions uneasy. "Please take a seat," the steward instructed. Julia sat at the nearest chair, her nerves taut. The steward stepped to the head of the table, raising a glass. "To the past," he said, "and to the truth." Chapter 3. The Game. Dinner was served in silence, each course more elaborate than the last. Julia barely touched her food, her unease growing. The other guests exchanged wary glances but said nothing. When the plates were cleared, the steward produced a small wooden box and placed it on the table. "Inside this box lies the key to understanding Harper Manor's history," he said. "But it comes at a price. You must each take a turn drawing from it." Julia's pulse quickened. The steward opened the box, revealing slips of paper folded neatly. He gestured to the guest nearest him. "You may begin." One by one, the guests drew a slip of paper and read it aloud. Each contained a cryptic message. "The veil is thin. Beware the mirror. Listen for whispers." When Julia's turn came, her fingers trembled as she unfolded her slip. "Do not run." The words sent a jolt through her. Before she could question their meaning, the chandelier above them flickered. A cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. Darkness enveloped them. Chapter 4. The Shadows. Panic set in as the room filled with the sound of shuffling footsteps. Julia's heart pounded as she fumbled for her phone, but its screen remained stubbornly dark. A faint glow appeared near the far wall, illuminating a large mirror. In its reflection, Julia saw the room, but the people around the table were wrong. Their faces were distorted, their eyes black voids. And then they moved, the reflections stepping away from the table, while their real counterparts remained frozen in place. One by one, the shadowy figures emerged from the mirror, their movements jerky and unnatural. Julia's breath caught as one turned its hollow gaze toward her. "Do not run," the steward's voice echoed in her mind, but instinct took over. Julia bolted from her chair, dashing toward the door. The shadows moved with inhuman speed, cutting off her escape. She stumbled, falling to the cold, marble floor. A hand, cold and clammy, gripped her ankle. Chapter 5. The Truth. When Julia woke, she was alone in a small candlelit room. The walls were covered in the same faded portraits she'd seen earlier, but the faces now bore expressions of anguish. The steward stood over her, his expression unreadable. "You were warned," he said. "What is this place?" Julia demanded, her voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" "This is Harper Manor," he replied. "A place caught between worlds. And you, Miss Hayes, are part of its story now." He gestured to a small table where the wooden box now rested. "The game is not over. Draw again." Julia hesitated, but the shadows in the corners of the room began to stir. With no other choice, she reached into the box and pulled out another slip of paper. "Face the mirror." The steward led her to a full-length mirror. Her reflection stared back, but as she stepped closer, it began to change. The reflection smiled, its eyes darkening. What is this?" Julia whispered. "Your truth," the steward said. "Accept it, or be consumed." Chapter 6. The Final Choice. Julia's mind raced. The reflection extended its hand, beckoning her forward. The shadows loomed closer, their whispering voices filling her ears. "Choose," the steward commanded. With trembling hands, Julia reached out to touch the mirror. The surface was cold and unyielding at first, but then it gave way, pulling her in. Darkness swallowed her whole. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the grand ballroom. The table was empty, the guests gone. The steward stood alone, watching her with an enigmatic smile. "Congratulations," he said. "You've survived the first night." "First night?" Julia repeated, her voice hollow. "Harper Manor has many secrets," he said, "and you have only just begun to uncover them." The doors behind him creaked open, revealing a long, dark hallway. "Shall we continue?"